This is The Little Black Dress of Women's Health, presented by Wen.
I'd like to welcome everyone back to the second part of our series around exercise and athletes in youth and women. And I'd like to introduce our guest. We've got Chrissy back, the amazing physio who has such a special interest in youth and exercise. And we're joined today by Alicia. Alicia is a dietitian who's got 15 years of experience, and she's got an amazing career. She has worked in the Institute of Sport, and she's working with the Matildas, and she has her own company with her husband, which is extremely successful. So today I'm going to let Chrissy introduce the topic, which is REDS.
Great. Thank you, Peta. Thanks for having me on the podcast today. So RED-S, or REDS as some people call it, does stand for a term called Relative Energy Deficiency in sport. It is, I guess, like a syndrome, and it encompasses lots of different things, but generally the overarching topic is when we exercise, we expel energy, and when we live our daily activities, we expel energy, and sometimes we don't fuel enough or get enough energy intake that supports these needs. And when that happens, we have, I guess, like an imbalance, and over time that can affect different parts of our system and our body and our general well-being. And then the resulting is that clinical term called RED-S. So the previous term it used to be called was the female athlete triad, where they would look at three different components. So eating disorder, bone health, and menstrual health or menstrual function. And if those three things were affected in an athlete or in a female athlete, then they would be classified as having a female athlete going under that category as a female athlete triad. But we're now recognising that males also can experience some symptoms that come under this, and also that it's not limited to just bone health issues or menstrual function issues or disordered eating / eating disorder. So it encompasses a lot of different areas of our body when that happens, and also things can be a bit subtle as well, so it didn't have to be so extreme. So that's kind of the snapshot of RED-S, and which is great. We've got Alicia here because it obviously encompasses so many different professions, and it's very much a multi-D or a multidisciplinary kind of action that we do to help our athlete and their well-being.
So Alicia, do you see lots of this condition?
Yeah, so REDS is one of those conditions that, as Chrissy said, it's very much a syndrome. And so it appears in athletes very differently, and everyone will have different symptoms and present, because it's caused by different things. So when we're looking at REDS and how frequent it is, the research is still coming out on how, the percentage of athletes that are impacted by REDS. REDS, I was very fortunate to be working at the Australian Institute of Sport at the time that it was coming out, and kind of replacing that female athlete triad. It was quite a polarizing discussion at that time. But I do love that it now encompasses so many different symptoms. It also appreciates, as Chrissy mentioned, that the different causes are multifaceted, and there's so many crossovers between it being an accidental piece. It might be actually intentional, but it also can be caused due to disordered eating or eating disorder. And it doesn't, it doesn't really matter around age, gender. But also I think it's really important to note that it also doesn't discriminate on training maturity either. So you can have these types of symptoms and syndromes in someone who might just go to the gym a few times a week, because the underlying cause is that low energy availability. And if we've got low energy available for our body, it does need to have those adaptations happen.
One of the things that we were talking about is that talking about food with young girls and female athletes is kind of a minefield at the moment, especially with all the stuff on social media with people recommending the weirdest diets and the weirdest things. So I think it's something that we really need to discuss with dietitians. It needs to really be referred back to professionals. I was going to ask you, either of you, how is it diagnosed?
Well, unlike a disease, it isn't actually that clear diagnosable piece. So it's not like there's a test that's like, okay, yep, that is REDS. So it is multifaceted, as Chrissy said, and it actually involves involvement from a sports doctor, alongside dietitian, alongside psychologist, and that looks at making sure that we're covering things like blood markers and that clinical assessment. It makes sure that we're covering nutrition intake, relationship with food, and it also makes sure that it's considering current capacity, coping, and mental health of that athlete as well. And so we're making sure that we're kind of ticking all those boxes, and that is where we can then come together and go, based around all of these different areas, we can now proceed with the diagnosis, if you like, of REDS being the likely leading factor.
And Chrissy, how does a physio fit into this?
Yeah, so depending on your setting, so sometimes you have the physio within a sporting setting and within the club. For majority of people, if we're in a clinic setting, we often see someone presenting with an injury. The most common one, I guess, would be sort of like a bone stress injury or a stress fracture or something like that. So that's sort of like our first kind of clue to then ask more questions. So in a clinic setting, we often are the first ones to see an injury, and then are therefore then the referrer to the right people if we suspect that REDS is on the cards here. So it is then having that communication across the different professions as well. And so we're kind of the physio sits there for the rehab journey, but also there to make sure that that avenue does happen, because I think, like Alicia said, it's a new term. I think it's still for some, physios and health professionals are still being missed or not picked up. So it is just trying to make sure that pathway is happening.
It's really interesting. When I was growing up, a lot of my friends were athletes, especially gymnasts, and they never got their periods, and they would exercise at night to keep their weight down, and their parents didn't know about it. And I think that one of the big things that I remember, and I don't know if things have changed, is that they were really happy that they weren't getting their periods. Is this something that does happen with REDS?
Yeah, and so menstrual function absolutely is almost like a little easy clue for us to suspect that this could be something. The hard thing with the REDS is menstrual function, often, I think, Alicia, you've done it in a presentation I've seen it before as well, is if you imagine your body like a phone, and it's full of battery, and you can kind of do, open all the apps and do everything. But REDS is almost like you're on 1% battery. So that might mean that, your phone's on power saving mode, so apps shut down and things are prioritized, and one of those apps might be your menstrual health and your menstrual function. So often either the 15 or 16-year-old hasn't yet had their first period, which we call primary amenorrhea, or they have had a period, but then the athlete has lost it, or it's changed after about 3 months of inconsistently not being there. So menstrual function definitely is a marker for us, and it's a question as a physio that we would be interested in seeing. It's just tricky. There's a lot of people that don't have a regular period because they might be on contraception or something like that. So it's also other signs and symptoms that we have to piece together.
And Alicia, I wanted to touch on diet with you. And as I said earlier, it's just a minefield. I've got 2 young girls, and I'm just really wary of making sure that we don't give them issues around food. I'm wondering how you address it without putting a huge stigma on it.
Yeah. Relationship with food and body image is actually one of my main roles as a dietitian. I think often it's assumed that a dietitian just tells people what to eat or provides meal plans or instructs people, well, this is the amount of grams. And look, I'll be honest, there is a really, like, a lot of dietitians do that. We take a very behavior-based approach with all we do with our clients and our athletes that appreciates the person underneath the symptom. I think often in all health areas we can fall into the trap of treating the symptom and not asking the bigger question of why, and really appreciating that root cause and then working towards that root cause. A really good example is RED-S, where I think a lot of the time it's like, well, if they're not eating enough, then all I need to do is just tell them to eat more or train less. Simple. However, underneath that, and there's a really big risk to doing that. And I think as RED-S has become something that's more, there's a higher awareness and a bigger interest, we do have a real issue at the moment where I get lots of almost secondary referrals where a lot of health professionals mean really well by saying, okay, well, it looks like you've got the symptoms of RED-S, you probably need to eat more, or let's look at your nutrition and we'll get you to eat more. But that actually isn't fixing what's causing the underfueling. And so the biggest piece that when we're talking to an athlete is making sure that we're seeking that answer of what is leading to that underfueling. And I mentioned it really briefly before, where we're looking at, okay, is it intentional, first of all? Are you intentionally trying to make weight? Are you intentionally trying to lose weight or be in an energy deficit that is about, you know, a weight-making sport or something that actually needs to be done? Or are you trying to create an energy deficit to achieve a weight that you think is going to be performance enhancing? We need to seek out working through, is it accidental? So for example, is it financial, where you can't afford the amount of food or the quality of food that you need to eat enough and fuel the amount of exercise and training that you're doing? Is it that you're actually eating too well, where you're having a really big bulk of food, lots of colour, but also lots of fibre and very low energy dense food? So for example, eating lots of fruits and veggies and salads and thinking that they're doing the absolute best thing for their health, but at the same time they're filling themselves up on low energy, so they're accidentally underfueling even though they feel full and satisfied. Mm-hmm. You've also got accidental when an athlete has really high training loads. So they might be training lots of hours over the day, or they might be training frequently over the day. 2-3 training sessions is not uncommon for different levels of athletes and different types of sports. And so their opportunity to fuel is actually really low. So they might not want to eat much because they've got another training session, or they may not be able to fuel because they don't have access, or they're always maybe at the training facility and all those types of things. So that's where we look at accidental causes of energy deficiency. And there's also the disordered eating and eating disorder, which definitely is where your question was lying, Peter, of like, how do we create that really powerful, strong, confident relationship with food where an individual has full permission to fuel? And there is a lot of things that we can't control. And Peter, I could sense like you're like, oh, there's so many things that they're getting access to and messages they're getting access to that I can't control from the home. And it's the same in sport. There's lots of things that they can access outside of sport that we can't control in the sporting environment. So it's about, in those pieces, making sure that we're creating a really great education foundation and awareness foundation of what is common versus normal in those messages. And also ensuring they know how to clean up their algorithm or their following and those types of things, so those messages are less. So the other piece to that in creating a really strong environment in relationship with food is in the home, but also in school and also in the training environment. And that's where there are controllables, and I'm so confident that there's so many things that are currently happening that could be preventative, and making sure that we change that culture, that language, that environment to reduce the risk of RED-S. In the schools I have massive concerns, for example, where there's schools where it is actually frowned upon to eat at lunch, particularly in the female sphere, where it's just not culturally accepted within their peer group to eat. So we have athletes and individuals, not just athletes, getting home and actually having a binge response due to that restriction. And it's a creation of that disordered eating pattern that then can lead into eating disorder. In the training environment, we may have weights being taken or goal weights being given body shaming comments being given, comparison, for example, of like, oh, well, if you just weighed this much like the other athlete, you'll be successful, or if you just look like them, you'd be successful, or if you just lost a little bit of weight, or you need to be this much to get selected. These conversations are still happening. And so there's lots of different things that are then leading to that shame, that pressure to reach a certain weight. And that's where we need to do more, because that is preventable in terms of both the relationship with food, but also the issue when it comes to REDs. And I think we do need to speak a better language when it comes to sports, of actually talking their language of going, you know what, this does increase the risk of them getting sick. This does increase the risk of them getting injured, as you said, Chrissy. This does reduce their performance or their adaptations to their training. So you're kind of talking what actually means a lot to that stakeholder. So like, oh, I get it. You know, there is a cost to leanness. In the home, I think we're at a really tricky point now where all the athletes coming through, their parents have actually lived their whole lives in diet culture. And so what we're seeing is all that diet culture and commenting, all really well-intentioned, coming through in the way that an athlete might, you know, for example, be fearful of carbohydrate, or be fearful of change in weight, or have body comments not just happening in the sporting sphere but happening in the home, because we fear that body change, but we also fear different foods. And a lot of kids don't feel full permission to eat. And the body is very weird, but also the human mind is very weird. If we don't have full permission, we end up working in a scarcity mindset, and that's a really dangerous place when we come to food. So, you know, one thing that I love working with is young athletes and young kids, and also parents, because that's where such a key impact can happen, where we're giving full permission but also autonomy and empowerment to the parent and the child to create a home environment that actually gives them full permission to fuel based around not only performance and not only health, because health and performance are actually about our well-being, and we need to feel connected as humans. We need to celebrate. We need to, you know, have a really positive, you know, strong mood, mental health, where we can cope and have resilience. And so I think with food, sometimes we do get caught up in the nutrients, but we forget actually food has such a big cultural value, mental health value, and that's where I think we can really make some really strong things forward, for sure.
It's interesting you talk
It's really
about...
interesting
Yeah, sorry, you go, Peter.
Oh, it's really interesting having teen girls at the moment, or preteen and teen girls. They have started to come home, because we are a really big foodie family. I'm married to a Dutch man, and all we do is eat all the time. Yeah. But they've started to come home and talk about good food and bad food, which is really interesting. And we've had to say to them, there is actually no bad food. It's how you eat it and what you do with it. We don't demonise a certain type of food. And I do think in sport that can happen a lot. Food can be demonised in every day as well. But I do think it's a really common thing. And it's something that as a parent you can't control, and it can be quite scary, because you may have all these really great ideas at home, but my children are bringing ideas that we haven't exposed them to into the house.
Yeah. I can assure you, Peter, that the impact and influence you have in the home is the most powerful one. So even though it feels really uncomfortable, and even though there's lots out of our control, the home is where so much incredible stuff can happen when it comes to our relationship with food, our values around, you know, our beliefs, all of those things. So, but I agree with you. My kids are only still quite young, and they have come home with good and bad, healthy, unhealthy, sometimes foods, you know, all that language. I'm like, I've never used this. Like, I've never said these words. Where they're coming from. And yeah, there's so many intricacies, right, in what influences our behaviour. And I think one thing I'm so concerned about is, of course, social media. I think the power of social media and how fast that information and messaging and visual messaging can come across, and you know, just the number of what I eat in a day videos, for example, are just so concerning, because at the start of every single one there's a body check. You know, there's a picture of the abs before they show you what they ate in a day, and even if they're not intending for that to say anything, it is speaking so loudly. If you want to look like me, you need to eat what I eat.
I think it's also really good for, you know, there's this, like you mentioned, this intentional and unintentional, and it, you know, it can be this disordered eating and eating disorder sphere. and it also might be quite subtle as well. You can have this spectrum. You know, for people listening too, it's like maybe you have a good relationship, and you know, I'm just thinking a couple of athletes that I've had is, you know, this one guy who was, and I know, sorry, it was, but one of my male athletes, and he was, you know, exercising in, you know, behind the doors above what the, you know, coach had given him, and was like getting up early to do like hidden exercise, and had a stress fracture, and that's very different to my other athlete who just went from, you know, being an 800 meter runner to a 1500 meter runner, where their load just went up, and had seen a previous dietitian but didn't then change his fueling for the new training plan. So I guess you just like, it can be really less obvious as well, and I think that's kind of good to know.
And they can all cross over, and I think of that more as a Venn diagram where you've got, you know, 3 circles where you've got intentional, unintentional, and then also disordered eating disorder, and in the middle there's a crossover where all 3 overlap, and there might be 2 overlapping at one time as well. So it can be really complex, and as a dietitian we're kind of gaining all this information and gathering and spending time getting to know that person so that we can meet them where they're at. And then for us, it's about working alongside them to work through, okay, what's the priority right now, and what do you feel you have capacity and to do. But also that has to be timed alongside their season or what their goals are performance-wise. And it's not always the best time to do everything. And with behaviour change, it's really important that we're not just instructing, well, if we just increase here or we just add this here, yeah, absolutely, that would fix it. But it's very unlikely that person is going to be able to do that. So we've got to make sure that our habits and our actions are scalable, they're enjoyable, they're really obvious for that person, so that they make sense long term, but also they can build upon that progress over time as well, and build on their confidence at the same time as well.
So from a take-home point of view, I'd really like to get some ideas from both of you for parents as well as for young female athletes. So if you had to give parents a take-home on how to recognise it, and it's so hard with teens and older children, because they do start to hide stuff from you. So what would your take-home message be, both of you? So Alicia, you first for a parent.
Yeah. So we actually use some really reflective questions, and that can be for the parent or the athlete. And the way that we word these questions is very inviting, without judgment of do you do this or do you do that. We don't ask those questions. What we do ask, and what we ask of the people we're working with, but also the parents or the coaches we're working with, because the support team behind that athlete is also so important and can notice so much as well, is questions like, you know, I've noticed that I'm getting sick more often than I used to, or sick more often than my teammates. I notice that I'm getting more injuries or niggles, or, you know, more soreness than my usual, or what I would expect for how much I'm training. I've noticed that my libido's changed, and, you know, obviously with the younger athlete, that's a subject we don't generally talk about unless it comes up in one-to-one conversation. But when we're looking at the male athletes, the research over the last year or two, where the incredible Bron Lundy has done her PhD in the male athlete and trying to design a male screening tool for low energy availability, is her finding was it was most related to libido and also morning erection. And so just like we've spent years working through the menstrual cycle and getting used to talking about that and becoming a normal part of the conversation, I think the next step in low energy availability is actually working through, well, how do we create a safe space for the conversation for the male around morning erection frequency and what's normal versus common, and working through that. You can also ask questions like, I've noticed that I'm not progressing in my training as I'd expect for how much training I'm doing. I've noticed that I'm more irritable around my loved ones than I would expect. I notice that I'm finding it hard to make decisions, or finding it hard to focus and concentrate. And for those playing at home, I think one of my favourite interviews I've done with an athlete is, and as she pointed out so beautifully, is often the loved ones are the first ones to know, because the mood changes, the irritability, the mood swings are really big shifts, and sometimes that's the first thing to go. A really interesting thing that happens is actually sometimes the performance, and often the performance is the last thing to go. So one hypothesis for that is that if we're going back generations, when we did go through famine and low energy availability, is that it was actually really important that we could still hunt and move for food. And so there was other adaptations that would happen initially to things like our sex hormones, menstrual cycle, mental capacity, those types of things before the physical symptoms would take on. So I think it's really important that we're aware of those early symptoms and appreciate the way that we might be able to support them.
Okay, and Chrissy, how about you?
For parents? For
both, because Alicia did them both. So how about...
You really did.
She's an overachiever. She just wanted to get it all in.
Sorry, I really did do
no,
the
it's good. Detail's good. I'll go shorter. So for parents, I think take-home messages is, and a bit like Alicia was talking about, is just recognising. And I think listening to this podcast is like a big well done, because I think it's a new term. It's just, just having an awareness of it is first step. And I think the second thing really is just to not... if you suspect it, I think it's really hard in adolescence because lots of things cross over. But if your kid's tired and they're moody, and it's easier to brush things off. If you have, like Alicia said, some questioning that might be, if you feel comfortable with that and your relationship better with your kid, but it might mean it's better to get someone else involved. So if you suspect something, this is where your GP that preferably has an interest in women's health, because I've had Red S and I've totally been missed, even going through multiple different health professionals. So well done for listening, and then you can use that information to if you suspect it, find out further information. And lastly, for parents, I love menstrual cycle, and we're very comfortable talking about being health professionals, but sometimes it's not on the dinner table. And I think that just normalising those conversations in the home, just generally out and about, is really good. And this goes for athletes as well. And I think that comment is also for both sets of parents if there's a male and a female. So often the one that's had a previous menstrual cycle, as your typical mum, might be the one having those conversations. But I think if we want to start to normalise that and then get the message out there, then both sets of parents, if there's a father figure there, would be ideal. And then, for the athlete themselves, again, this is where tracking your wellness, which we've spoken about before. If some people don't have a menstrual cycle for whatever reason, and that might just be with contraception, so that might not be your marker to track how you're going. But just the simple things: how you're feeling, like, do you feel tired? Are you finding that maybe your performance is changing even though you're working really hard at it? Have you noticed yourself getting ill a little bit more common than usual? You're just a bit slow to heal, or maybe you have had a stress fracture. All these little questions, just checking in and how you're feeling. And if you think that there might be something more, then I would definitely, again, just touch base with a professional that can really help. And it's for your interest in actually just your well-being, your performance. It is there to enhance by getting that checked out. So
okay,
maybe
I have a really practical question.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I have a really practical question for Alicia, because we talked about this in the last podcast. So most people know that they can self-refer to a physio. How about a dietitian?
Yeah, they can also self-refer as well. So with dietitians, you can get a referral from your doctor, and that can be used as a chronic health condition, which for this podcast you're probably unlikely to need. However, a really important piece that everyone needs to be aware of is also there is a really big offering and very it's just changed the game in terms of eating disorder support as well. So if you do have listened to this, and I know we haven't covered much around disordered eating disorder, or the symptoms around that, but if you do suspect that maybe your loved one or yourself are in a place where it's a really challenging relationship with food, and you'd like to gain help, you can absolutely self-refer to a psychologist, a dietitian, or a doctor. But you can also get Medicare support for those eating disorder appointments if you receive a plan as well. And there's a number of visits that are actually applicable on that. So it is actually really helpful, because it can be quite a long process of support, and that can be used with your dietitian.
And are there many dietitians like you specialising in this field?
Yeah, so the beautiful thing around dietetics is we've got niche areas, so we never get bored. We can always choose different avenues, and one of those avenues is in sports nutrition. So if you're looking for a support in this area, we do see clients all around Australia, and we're online for that reason, so that we can coach people through these behaviour changes. As I said, it's really around how we actually bring all this into our life, not just knowing the science. And we employ sports dietitians for that reason. And we don't just work with athletes for the main reason that sports dietitians appreciate performance. And performance is something we all want to achieve, whether we are on the pitch, the court, in the pool, whatever it may be. Performance is actually how we just want to show up as people. And my performance definition has changed a lot since becoming a mum, where it used to be all about Ironman and all those types of endurance and performance measures. It's now about, if I can show up being present and playful, that's my idea of performance, and food is one of those things that allows me to do that. So that's one option. Then we've also got an eating disorder credentialed dietitian as well. So for example, I'm eating disorder credentialed, sports credentialed, and that allows me to appreciate that if I'm working with humans, I'm going to be working with disordered eating. Disordered eating is actually in athletes more common than it's not. So the rates of disordered eating in athletes is anywhere from 50 to 80%. And so if I'm not trained in eating disordered eating, I really don't feel like I'm doing my job well, considering where we're currently at.
Okay, well, thank you both for joining me. It's been amazing. It's actually been really informative, and I'm hoping that both young women and parents will get something out of this podcast. We will put the link to Alicia underneath the podcast, but it's always been a topic that I have been really wary of touching on from when, because there is so much static in this universe about eating, and people have such different opinions, and they declare themselves experts very quickly in eating. And I think it's something that if we are going to do anything in this field, we have to make sure that we approach the right people and we have really good professionals on board. So I just wanted to thank you both for coming on board again, and hopefully we can chat again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chrissy.
Thanks, Alicia.